Good afternoon, sir. Should we wait next 2-3 minutes to start? Or
Sure, madam.
okay,
Sure.
because I can see very less participants right now. So maybe by 2:10.
Okay. Okay.
Satyajit sir, should we start?
Sure, madam.
Thank you. So everyone, welcome back to the second session, which I'm going to take today. That is for hypothesis development and hypothesis testing. So Many of you, if I ask you what is hypothesis, you all will definitely tell me, ma'am, it's an assumption which we make while conducting a research. I'm sure this is the definition which you all will give me, that hypothesis means the assumption, right? So what we'll be discussing in next 1.5 hours is about the how different types of hypothesis which are available. What is hypothesis, why do we need to define it, and then what are the various terms, the jargons which you should know while doing hypothesis testing, and then finally a bit of hypothesis testing procedure, because I can see there are other sessions as well as analysis. So we'll cover the conceptual part. We'll try to understand what exactly are the different terms which we use while defining and while testing the hypothesis. All right, so let me share the presentation. Give me a minute. I won't take the risk of doing a slideshow. I'll continue. Is this visible to all?
Yes, madam, it is visible.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So basically, a hypothesis is considered as an intelligent guess or prediction or assumption that gives direction to the researcher to answer the research question. So you frame a research question at the beginning of your research, and based on the literature review, the researches which you have gone through, you come out with some predictions, with some guesses about your variables in question, and that is what is the hypothesis for a research. So hypothesis can be defined as a formal statement of the tentative or expected prediction of the relationship between two or more variables in a specified population. So basically, you start your research with the unanswered research question that defines your research statement or your problem statement. In between, after doing a bit of survey, after doing a bit of literature review, you are now in a position to make a guess. That is your hypothesis, and on basis of which you then collect your data, you analyze, and you come down to conclusions whether your prediction, based on the reviews, based on whatever data you have, is that what exactly was proven by the data analysis as well. So a hypothesis is a formal tentative statement of the expected relation between two or more variables under study. So this basically defines the relationship which the different variables of your study are having or not. Okay? So a hypothesis helps to translate the research problem and objective. So there's a link. You need to visualize the link between your research problem and objective and your hypothesis, and then your final results and outcomes. So when you talk of your thesis, there should be a link between your research problem and objectives, your hypothesis, and then your final result. You cannot have a different research problem and objective, a totally unrelated hypothesis, and a totally unrelated outcome. So the first thing which you need to be conscious is there has to be a link between your research problem and objectives, the hypothesis which you have developed, and the outcome results of your study. It is, of course, as we were discussing, derived from the research problems, the literature review, and the conceptual framework of your research work. It logically flows from a literature review. Whatever you have studied will help you to decide what guess you would like to make. So hypothesis makes the following contributions in research studies. That is, number one, it provides clarity to the research problem and research objectives. So basically, the objectives and the problems which we have defined in the beginning of the research, we get a better clarity of it when we are defining our hypothesis. Also, it explains or predicts the expected results or outcomes of the research. It indicates the type of research design as to what kind of a research design is included for the research, and it directs the research study process. So after defining your hypothesis, you're now having a direction as to where your research will now carry forward. All right. It also identifies the population of the research study that is to be investigated or examined. It facilitates the data collection, data analysis, and data interpretation. So you can actually understand the importance of developing a correct, a concrete, a concise hypothesis statement. Now, if I ask you all, what are the types of hypotheses? I am sure 90% of the participants here will tell me null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. If I'm not wrong, this is what I'll get as an answer, right? But if you dig a little deeper, these are the different kinds of research hypothesis which are available. That is research hypothesis, null hypothesis, and testable hypothesis. Now, again, research hypothesis can be divided as simple hypothesis, complex hypothesis, directional hypothesis, non-directional hypothesis, causal hypothesis, and associative hypothesis. And this is something which you all need to know, because when you're studying research methodology, you just need not directly define your null and alternate. You need to know what are the different kinds of hypotheses which are available to you, which you can define. And while defining a hypothesis, which type of hypothesis will you like to define? Will it be a simple one, a complex one, a directional one, a non-directional one, a causal one, or an associative one? So hypothesis, the first type is research hypothesis, and under research hypothesis, you have these 6 types of hypothesis. Again, for null hypothesis, which we very clearly simply say null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. But under null hypothesis, we again have 4 different kinds of hypothesis, and then you have the testable hypothesis. Now, what we'll do in next few minutes is we'll be briefly discussing the different kinds of hypothesis which I've just defined right now. So the first, which is research hypothesis, under this, the first one is simple hypothesis. Now, simple hypothesis predicts that there exists a relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable. So in a simple hypothesis, you have 2 variables, an independent variable, and simply you predict that there exists a relationship between them. Please do not get confused that okay, null hypothesis says there doesn't exist, and alternate say there exists, and that is the only thing which we have. Hypothesis is a prediction. Okay, negating that is your null, and alternate is the one which we use in our research, which mentioned the hypothesis in the alternate hypothesis when we are writing a research paper. So if you plan to have a simple hypothesis, that is when you're doing your research or your research objectives, and you identify that you have only a independent variable and one dependent variable, and you're trying to predict the relation between the two, that is when we use a simple hypothesis. Like, for example, too early position changing of a fully bedridden patient will prevent bed sore, right? So in this case, too early position changing is independent variable, and bed sore prevention is dependent variable. The statement shows that there exists a relationship between too early positioning and bed sore prevention. So this is an hypothesis which is a simple one. That is, a too early position changing of a patient will prevent bed sore. So you have 2 factors, an independent and a dependent, and you are predicting the relation between the two. So this is a simple hypothesis. Now we move to a complex hypothesis. Complex hypothesis is when you have 2 or more independent variables and dependent variable. For example, the same thing, we are extending it further. For a fully bedridden patient, too early position changing, too early back care, and a high protein diet will build up body resistance, will promote blood circulation, and will promote bed sore. So you see, you have 3 independent variables and you have 3 dependent variables. The independent ones are too early position changing, too early back care, and a high protein diet. So all these 3 are your independent variables, and your dependent variables are, it will build up your body resistance, it will promote blood circulation, and it will prevent bed sore. So you need to appreciate how we are changing from a simple hypothesis which had only 1 dependent and 1 independent to a more complex hypothesis where you're having two or more independent as well as dependent variables. So from your objectives, from your problem statements, you need to identify how many dependent and independent variables you have, and then you need to create your hypothesis. Next, the third kind of hypothesis is your directional hypothesis. Now, many a times you must have heard one-tail test, two-tail test. So what is all about all this? So directional hypothesis predicts the direction of the dependent and dependent variable. So if in a hypothesis, you are able to predict the direction of the relationship between the two, that is, if A is increasing, B will also increase, or if A is increasing, B will also decrease. That is when a directional hypothesis is defined. That is, you are defining the direction of relationship, whether there is a positive relation or whether there is a negative relation between the two variables. I hope the slides are moving. If not, please interfere in between and let me know. All right. So, like for example, high quality of nursing education will lead to high quality of nursing practices. So you see, there is an independent variable, that is nursing education, and there is another dependent variable, that is nursing practice skills. So high quality of the independent variable will lead to high quality of the dependent variable. So this is a directional hypothesis. Now we move to non-directional hypothesis. There are hypotheses where we predict the relation between the two, but we do not specify the direction, whether the one will increase, the other will decrease, or both will increase. This we are not able to predict in our hypothesis. For example, the teacher-student relationship influences students' learning, but this influence is a positive influence or a negative influence. We are not specifying that in the hypothesis. So this is a non-directional hypothesis. I hope this is clear. If you have any doubt in between, please stop me and ask me there itself. All right. Next is the causal hypothesis. Now, causal hypothesis predicts a cause and effect relationship or interaction between the independent variable and the dependent variable. This hypothesis predicts the effect of independent variable on the dependent. So we have a cause-effect relationship between the independent and the dependent variable, which is being predicted in the causal hypothesis. In this, the independent variable is the experimental or the treatment variable. The dependent variable is the outcome variable. So, like if I give medicine to someone, the person the fever will go down. So this will have a cause and effect. Like early post-operative ambulation will lead to prompt recovery. So anywhere where a treatment or an experiment is involved and the outcome is the dependent variable, that is that comes under the cause and effect hypothesis or the causal hypothesis. The next is your associative hypothesis. Associative hypothesis predicts an associative relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. When there is a change in any one of the variable, change also occurs into the other. That is, there is an association between the two variables, the independent variable and the dependent variable. It can be either a positive association or it can be a negative association. So, to summarize, hypothesis, that is research hypothesis, are of various types. That is simple hypothesis, complex hypothesis, you have directional hypothesis, you have non-directional hypothesis, you have causal hypothesis, and you have associative hypothesis. So from your research problem and from your objectives, you need to identify what are the different variables, and you need to then define your hypothesis based on the set of independent and the set of dependent variables and what exactly you want to predict, which you will be later testing from your data. Now coming to the second type of hypothesis, that is the null hypothesis, which we generally management social science researchers use. So null hypothesis is also called the statistical hypothesis because this type of hypothesis, yes.
Ma'am, I have a doubt regarding directional hypothesis.
Yes.
Ma'am, I was asking that you said that the increase of one thing leads to the increase of another thing. You that gave that example of directional hypothesis. So, ma'am, I want to say is that the happening of positive happening of something leading to the negative happening of something
Yes,
will
that is
also
also
that.
come into directional. I
Okay.
just gave this as an example that,
Yes, ma'am.
directional hypothesis, if one is increasing, the other is increasing. It can also be that if one is increasing, the other is decreasing. Just
Yes, ma'am.
that you are predicting the direction of the relationship. That
Okay,
is,
ma'am.
in which direction will it move? Will it move towards the up, that is increase, or whether it will negative relation or a positive relation?
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay,
Okay.
these are very interesting things. You'll not get it generally in the research methodology books. So this is something which I have studied somewhere, and very. If you can mention it in your papers, in your theses, this will impress the guides or the reviewers. So when we now come to the null hypothesis, so we were discussing that null hypothesis is what you all have been doing or what we all have been doing in social science. So these are the statistical hypotheses, because this type of hypothesis is used for statistical testing and statistically interpreting your result. The null hypothesis predicts that there is no relationship between independent variable and dependent variable. I'm sure this is clear to all, that null hypothesis is something which tells you that there is no relation between your independent and dependent variable. Like nasogastric tube feeding does not alter body temperature. So wherever you negate your statement, that is where you have your null hypothesis. Now again, under null hypothesis, you have four different kinds of null hypothesis. The first one is simple null hypothesis. All right, so bed rest will not relieve severe asthmatic dyspnea. In this example, the independent variable, that is bed rest, does not have any causal relation with the dependent variable. So you have one independent variable and one dependent variable, and you are predicting that there is no relation between the two. That is your simple null hypothesis. Okay. Next is you have complex, where you have more than one independent and more than one dependent, just as we were discussing in the research hypothesis. So smoking, drug abuse, alcoholism, tobacco use, etc. have no relation in occurrence of malaria, mumps, or chickenpox. So if you see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 independent factors, and you have 3 dependent factors. So again, this is a complex null hypothesis. Why null? Because there is a negative or a negation in this statement, that there is no relationship between the two. All right. Next is your causal null hypothesis. Again, as we were doing when you are trying to do any kind of experiment, or when you are trying to do any kind of treatment, and the dependent variable is an outcome of that experiment, that is what is known as your causal null hypothesis. Like high intake of fluid does not cause tissue edema. In this example, the independent variable, that is high fluid intake, does not have any causal relation with the dependent variable, that is such as tissue edema. All right. So wherever you have a cause and effect relationship, and when you're negating that cause and effect relationship, that is when we call it as a causal null hypothesis. All right. And the last is your associative null hypothesis. That is, example will be increased dose of antibiotics will not reduce body temperature. So you are trying to prove that there is no association between your independent variable and dependent variable. Right. Now, the third type of hypothesis is the testable hypothesis. That is such hypothesis in which you are predicting the independent and the dependent variable, and these variables are testable or measurable. So basically, when we do a research, we form hypotheses which are testable. That is, you predict the relationship between dependent and independent, and the variables which you have mentioned in your hypothesis are testable or are measurable, right? Like increase in patient body's temperature cause increase in patient's pulse rate. So this is an example where you can test, where you can measure the body temperature, the patient's pulse rate. So any variables which can be measured are what we will be taking in our actual hypothesis. So I hope it's clear how we define our hypothesis. You need to analyze whatever you have mentioned in your research statements, your research objectives. You need to count down all the factors which you have taken, and then you need to create your hypothesis. Now you'll have a clear understanding as to what kind of a hypothesis you're creating. Are you creating a simple and complex, a directional, a non-directional, that you will not be predicting whether both will be increasing, or if one is increasing, the other is decreasing. You'll just predict that there's a relation between the two, or you'll be having a cause and effect hypothesis. So all these things will help you to define or develop your hypothesis statement. Next is some variables. We always say independent variable, dependent variable. But what exactly are variables? You'll get many terms, like independent variable, dependent, extraneous variable, environmental variable, demographic variable. All these terms keep on coming in your research. So I thought I'll cover this as well for you. That is, what are variables? So research variables are defined as qualities, properties, characteristics, behaviors, attributes of the element which was under study. The population element, remember, जिसके हम लोग sample लिए. So when you are able to study the quality or the property or characteristics of those people, of those elements in your sample, which could be either people or group or object or an event or an activity, and these variables changes, the value of these characteristics, they keep on changing. It means that there is no fixed value to it, right? So that is what is a research variable. Variables are manipulable and measurable. So some factor which has a constant value will not be a part of your research variable. All right. So there are different types of research variables which we'll be discussing. The first being independent variable, then we have the dependent, then extraneous variable, demographic variable. Now coming to the first, that is independent variable. Now independent variable is a property that can be manipulated by the researcher to cause an effect on the dependent variable. It is also called experimental variable or treatment variable. So an independent variable is something, in simple words, if I tell you, which manipulated by the research can increase the quality or the property or the quantity of that variable. It is also known as a treatment variable. Treating or experimenting with it to get the dependent variable, to get the result or to get the outcome on the dependent variable. Right? So independent variable is something which can be manipulated by the researcher. All right? Dependent variable, you cannot do anything with it. It is simply an outcome of the treatments which you have done on the independent variable. Whatever manipulations you have done, whatever treatments you have done with your independent variable, you will get the outcome as your dependent variable. So it is the quality or property or behavior, or as we were saying, outcome, that the researcher predicts and that occurs in response to the manipulation, experimentation, or treatment of the independent variable. It is also called as outcome variable because it defines the outcome of an experiment or of a treatment of the independent variable. I hope this is clear. Let's discuss with an example. O2 administration to a highly nervous patient by a face mask instead of a nasal cannula will cause less anxiety to the patient, right? So this is a hypothesis statement which is defined. Now you need to identify the variables here. So in this example, the independent variable, that is the methods of O2 administration, that is by face mask, it causes an effect on the dependent variable, that is the patient's state of anxiety. In this, the independent variable, that is method of O2 administration, is manipulated because O2 instead of face mask may also be administered by a nasal cannula. and this may cause an influence on the dependent variable, or there may be a different outcome, such as patient's state of anxiety may be increased. Now, I hope this is clear that, independent variable here is O2 administration. Now, O2 administration can be manipulated by the researcher because he has the option of doing it through face mask and he has the option of doing it through nasal cannula. But the outcome, which is the anxiety to the patient, can be increased or decreased based on the manipulative method which you have used with your O2 administration to the patient. So, independent variables can be manipulated, can be changed, can be increased or decreased by the researcher, but the outcome, we do not have any control over that, and we need to monitor it without any biasness. So this defines your independent variable and your dependent variable. Next, we move to extraneous variables. Now, what are extraneous variables? They exist in all type of research studies, but the researcher does not include them for the research purpose. These are the variables which confuse or mix the relationship between the variable and also interfere with the rational or causal relationship between the independent and the dependent variables. Let me now get to an example to explain you. Okay, the researcher makes an attempt to identify those. As a researcher, you need to identify these extraneous variables before the research study is initiated. Even before you start the research study, you need to identify your extraneous variables, and you need to control the influence of these extraneous variables, else the result which you will be getting will be affected by these and you will not get the correct answer. For example, a calm and quiet environment at bedtime at night will allow sound sleep to a patient in a general ward. Now, in this example, I'm sorry, the calm spelling is misplaced here. In the above example, the independent variable calm and quiet environment will have an effect on the dependent variable, that is sleep of patient at night, right? So, extraneous variables could be like there could be some party outside the hospital, so or there could be some wedding procession going from outside. So all these kinds of influencing factors which can affect your experiment over the night, or there could be thundering and lightning, so these are some extraneous variables which you need to control before you conduct this experiment on a night, that a calm and quiet environment at bedtime will allow sound sleep to a patient in a general ward. So the external variables which you have are to be controlled. Now, there are some environmental variables which also needs to be checked upon. So environmental variables are the variables which compose a research setting where the researcher study is conducted. These variables are climate, family background, social background, institution setup, community setup, education setup, etc. So these are all part of extraneous variables, but we are separately defining it as your environmental variables as well. So what happens is we control all these different kinds of variables. That is the reason for explaining you all these, like the demographic. There are different variables which define the quality or the characteristics of the subject in the research study, and which are collected to describe the sample. These variables are also called the sample characteristics, like if everyone is male, or if everyone is between 21 to 40, or if the annual income of all the employees are between 5 lakhs and above. So all these things will come under your demographic variables, and when you're conducting a research, you need to be sure that you are controlling these, right? So when considering the variables, when defining your hypothesis, when starting a research, you need to first identify all these kinds of variables, control the external and the extraneous variables, and only let the independent variable affect your dependent variable. right? Now we come to assumptions. Now, what are assumptions? Assumptions are the statement of the basic principle of facts that are established and are usually accepted as true on the basis of logic or reasoning without verification or proof, though they may not have been scientifically tested, right? So, assumptions are the statement of basic principles. So what happens when you are conducting a research? You make some assumptions apart from the hypothesis which you have defined. There are some set up assumptions which you make, that this is, you're sure that this is going to happen. So that is known as your assumptions. Assumptions is picked up by the research from various sources. These sources are previous research studies, theories, clinical fields, etc. Now, we also define the limitations while defining your hypothesis, that is the restrictions within a research study, which reduces the credibility or generalizability of the research finding. The limitations of the research study are also called the weak points of the study. So you need to define, while defining your hypothesis, you need to define your different kinds of variables. You need to define what are the assumptions which you have made, the limitations which you have, and then finally create or form your hypothesis of the study. So this is about your hypothesis development. Any doubt till here before we move to hypothesis testing? Yes. Yeah. See, basically, extraneous variables, if I talk about, so these are something that can potentially affect the outcome of your research, right? And if you leave them uncontrolled, your external variables can lead to inaccurate conclusions about the relationship between independent and dependent. So, like for this example, we are considering the, if it depends on the researcher, what are the assumptions which you have made. Like if you're assuming that the external factors or the extraneous variables are controlled, and then you're considering it as a calm room. So it depends how you're treating it. Like maybe in a general ward, when you're taking into a hospital for a research, there could be people sitting around, there could be some kind of noise, there could be mobiles allowed. So there are different factors. So what all factors you have included will then define. So this is a very general thing which we are, as an example which I have given. But when you are writing it in your research paper or your thesis, you need to be very specific, as to what are your external extraneous variables, right? These are those variables which we are not interested in studying, which you don't want to consider in your research. They might affect, the dependent variable, they might affect that dependent variable, but you want to control them so that you're only studying the focused independent variables which you want to study their effect on the dependent variable, right?
Ma'am,
Yes.
is there a difference between control variable and external variable?
Control variables actually are, extraneous variables can be known as control variables because we are controlling them, right? And we are ignoring them during our research. We are trying to limit them. So basically, we can say that control variables and extraneous variables are same. All right.
Okay, ma'am. If one of the objectives is to examine the extent of digital literacy of individuals, then ma'am, in which under which type of hypothesis will this
Can you
come?
repeat the statement?
Ma'am, to examine the extent of digital literacy among individuals.
Digital literacy among individuals. So how are you going to measure this digital literacy? I can only see one factor in this hypothesis statement. So how are you going to measure it? To measure the digital literacy of individuals, right?
Yes, ma'am.
This is your research objective, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So when you're creating your hypothesis, how you're going to measure it? How you're going to, measure the digital literacy? Have you thought of some things as to what all will an individual have, which will help me to measure the digital literacy?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. There are 2 to 3 items
Yeah.
through which.
So when you have 2, 3 items, so those are the outcomes of digital literacy.
Yes, ma'am.
So digital literacy is an independent variable, and the 2, 3 outcomes, or you could say the awareness level has increased, or maybe social site significance has improved, whatever. So all these things are your dependent variables. Of course, it is a complex hypothesis where you have more than one dependent variable.
Okay, ma'am.
So
Thank you, ma'am.
yeah, now we'll start with hypothesis testing. Just a minute. I hope the PPT is visible. I hope the PPT is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So basically, when we talk of hypothesis testing, the general goal of a hypothesis test is to rule out the chance, or the sampling error as a plausible explanation for the results from a research study. This is a technique to help determine whether a specific treatment has an effect on the individuals in a population or not. So what exactly we are doing in hypothesis testing? We have made some predictions, right? Based on those predictions, we then test the hypothesis whether whatever we have done is we are actually getting the results, or the desired results, the predicted results, or not, after doing the treatment or the experiment. So the hypothesis test is used to evaluate the results from a research study in which a sample is selected from the population as step 1. The treatment is administered to the sample, that is step 2, and then after the treatment, the individuals in the sample are measured. So basically, when we talk of hypothesis testing, we do this. We select a sample, we do the experiment, or we do the treatment, and then we study the result, which is then measured, right? Now, this is just a representation, that is, a population before treatment, the mean and the standard deviation you have calculated, then you give the treatment, and then you have an unknown population after treatment. You don't know what is the outcome of this. So you actually need to find out the prediction of your treatment which you have done. Right? So that is all about hypothesis testing. If the individuals in the sample are noticeably different from the individuals in the original population, we have evidence that the treatment has an effect. So we have a population of, say, patients of chickenpox, and then you give them a medicine, right? Then we see the outcome. And if those patients are now treated, we have the evidence that that particular medicine is having an effect on the patients. So this is what we are doing in the hypothesis in a nutshell. Sample or a population, give treatment, measure the result, and then conclude whether the treatment had an effect or not, or whether that independent variables had an effect on the dependent variable. However, it is also possible that the difference between the sample and the population is simply sampling error. It could be that there was no effect of the treatment, but because of sampling error, you got the difference in the result, and you concluded that the treatment had an effect. So always, while testing your hypothesis, you need to check the sampling error. So this is just a representation of the same. Now, the purpose of the hypothesis test is to decide between 2 explanations. What are those 2 explanations which we have just done right now? The first is the difference between the sample and the population can be explained by sampling error. That is, there was no effect of the treatment, but the difference was due to the sampling error. The second is the difference between the sample and the population is too large to be explained by sampling error. That is, you can say that the effect or the change is due to the treatment. All right, understood? The purpose of the hypothesis test is to decide between the two explanations. You took a sample from a population, you did a treatment on that, and you got the result. Now, that outcome, you need to specify, you need to justify that the change before and after change is not due to sampling error. It is much more than the significant level. It is not a very small, difference or the explanation, and hence it is because of the treatment and not because of the sampling error. Now, see, this is how your normal curve looks like. Sample means close to H naught, high probability value. Now, what happens is this is a kind of a graph which you make, right? If H naught is true, you get these two, and this is your critical region, and you reject. And we'll move forward and I'll explain everything about this. Now we come to some words which we use in our hypothesis testing. That is the null hypothesis, the alpha level, the critical region, and the test statistic. The following 4 steps outline the process of hypothesis testing and introduces some of the new terminologies which we were discussing. So we'll be basically discussing the 4 steps of hypothesis testing, and we'll discuss about all these words as well. So step 1. State the hypothesis and select the alpha level. So your first step is you define your null hypothesis, you define your alternate hypothesis, and then you define your alpha level or the cutoff for making a decision about the null hypothesis. The alpha level also determines the risk of a type 1 error. We will discuss the type 1 and type 2 error later. So step 1 is defining your H naught and the alpha level or the criteria for deciding about the null hypothesis. That, okay, this is the criteria because of which we'll reject or we'll accept your null hypothesis. See, these kinds of alphas are defined. That, okay, if alpha is 0.05, that is, if z value lies between minus 1.96 to 1.96, we will accept or else we will reject. Similarly, if your alpha is generally as a rule, we take alpha as 0.05 or 0.01, but you might also take it as 0.001. So it depends totally on the researcher as to what alpha level he or she would like to take. The precision, the accuracy, how much accuracy you want in your research will help you to determine your alpha. So step 1, a problem statement or the null hypothesis statement, the alternate hypothesis statement, and the alpha level as to what you're going to take as your alpha or the criteria under which you're okay with accepting or rejecting your null hypothesis. Now we move to step 2. Step 2 is locate the critical region. That is, the critical region consists of outcomes that are very unlikely to occur if the null hypothesis is true. That is, the critical region is defined by sample means that are almost impossible to obtain if the treatment has no effect. The phrase is almost impossible means that these samples have a probability that is less than an alpha level. So, critical region is actually this part. 1.96, the part to the left of this and to the part right to this. So this is your critical region. That is the values where you will be rejecting your H naught. So if you see this 90, if I'm assuming, the critical region as your alpha as your 5%, then the middle part, that is this part, has the highest probability of getting selected. Of being where the H naught will be true, and this blue part is your critical region where your H naught will be rejected. So based on your alpha, you also are able to define the step 2, which is your critical region, where if your H naught lies, if it lies, you will get your value as the H naught to be rejected. Now you come to the third part, that is the test statistics, which I'm sure you're going to study also in detail later. That is you compare the difference between the sample mean and the hypothesized population mean versus the amount of difference we would expect without any treatment effect. This is where your test statistics, that is the Z, the T, the F, all these things come into a role. So test statistics is here where we compute. A large value for the test statistics shows that the obtained mean difference is more than would be expected if there is no treatment effect. If it is large enough to be in the critical region, we conclude that the difference is significant or that the treatment has a significant effect. In this case, we reject the null hypothesis. So basically, if your value lies between this, then we say that there is the difference which you are getting between the treated sample and the untreated is because of sampling error. But if you get it beyond this, that is, the value is so high that you cannot say that it is because of sampling error, then we say that your null hypothesis is rejected and you actually accept that the treatment or the experiment had made a difference on the sample. I hope I'm able to put it up to you clearly as to what we are doing here. It's easy to put a T statistic. What are all these diagrams? What is the Z-score? What is alpha? What is this graph? Where do we reject? Where do we accept is important to know. Why do we not reject when it lies here? Why do we reject it only beyond critical region? Because this part is the chance that the sample had this value or had this difference only because of sampling error. It was not significant enough to be said that the treatment made this difference. All right. And once it is here, then we can say that it is not because of the sampling error. It is actually because of the treatment which you have done to your sample elements. Now, what we were discussing right now was your type 1 error and your type 2 error, right? So type 1 error is what? Most of the postgraduate students here will very quickly tell me, as per their syllabus of research methodology, this table. I have this table as well. Yes. See, what is a type 1 error? When H0 is true and when you have rejected it, this is a type 1 error. And when H0 is false, but you still retain H0, that is your type 2 error, right? So basically, if I explain you in words, a type 1 error occurs when the sample data appear to show a treatment effect when in fact there is none. Got it? So a researcher can get confused, can misinterpret and conclude that the sample data shows a treatment effect when actually it doesn't show a effect. In this case, the researcher will reject the null hypothesis and falsely conclude that the treatment has an effect. He will say that the null hypothesis is rejected and the treatment had an effect on the samples. But in reality, there was no such thing. So this is known as a type 1 error, and it is usually caused by unusual or unrepresentative sample, like we were discussing in the first session, that in case simple random sampling, some kind of data could be missed out. Some important population elements could be missed out from the sample. So that is where we might get a type 1 error. Just by chance, the researcher selects an extreme sample with the result that the sample falls in the critical region, even though the treatment has no effect. By chance, you selected all those samples which had the extreme values, and therefore you concluded that the treatment had an effect. There's always a chance of this. There's always a probability of this. So the hypothesis test is structured so that the type 1 errors are very unlikely. Specifically, the probability of a type 1 error is equal to the alpha level. So the alpha which you have defined in your step 1 is also equal to your type 1 error. So if you are defining your alpha as 5%, so you're actually saying that there is 5% chances of error that the sample data may show a treatment effect even though there is none. I hope I'm clear. Your 5% alpha level tells you that the sample data there's a 5% chance that the sample data may show that it has a treatment effect even though there was none. And this is defined by type 1 error or your alpha level. Now we move to the type 2 error. Type 2 error is when there was a treatment effect, but the researcher rejected it. When the sample does not appear to have been affected by the treatment, even though the treatment does have an effect. In this case, the researcher will fail to reject the null hypothesis and falsely conclude that the treatment does not have an effect. In type 2 errors are commonly the result of a very small treatment effect. Although the treatment does have an effect, it is not large enough to show up in the research study. So what happens in type 2 error is, it is basically the fault of a researcher if he or she has taken a very small treatment effect. You know, that the result is so significantly low that the researcher is not able to identify it. And even though there is a change, he rejects and he says that there has been no change by the treatment. So that is how you define your type 1 and your type 2 error. That is, if your H0 was true, that there is no effect of your independent variables and dependent variables, but you still say that you conclude that there is a relationship, that is known as your type 1 error. And if there was a relationship and still, because of having a very significant difference, you actually wrote down that, to accept H0, that is a type 2 error. All right. Now we move to one-tail test and two-tail test. You all must have heard these words. Ki one-tail test hai when you're doing a t-test or a z-test, and there's a two-tail test. So how do you determine the direction of the test, whether it is a one-tail test or a two-tail test? This is where we were already discussing the directional hypothesis. When a research study predicts a specific direction for the treatment effect, it is possible to incorporate the direction prediction into the hypothesis test. So if it is a directional hypothesis where you have defined the direction between the two or more variables, that is when it is a directional test, or it is known as a one-tail test. A directional test includes the directional prediction in the statement. In the hypothesis, you actually predict the direction of the relationship going. That is, variable A will increase and variable B will decrease. So whenever you're increasing variable A, variable B will decrease. This is your hypothesis statement. And then you test these kinds of statements as a one-tail test, and in the location of the critical region also we include it. We will not take the critical region on both sides. We will only take the critical region of the direction which we are predicting. All right. For example, if the original population has a mean of mu is equal to 80, all right, and then the treatment is predicted to increase the scores, then the null hypothesis will state that after treatment, mu will be less than equal to 80. Okay, that there is no increase. Of course, alternate will be that there is an increase. In this case, the entire critical region would be located in the right-hand tail of the distribution. All right, because we are predicting that there will be an increase in the score. Whenever the word is mentioned in your hypothesis, you will take a one-tail test. And now, I don't think that's included. And when this is not mentioned in the hypothesis, it's just mentioned that there is a relation or there is no relation. We do not define whether it will increase or decrease the dependent variable. That is when we consider a two-tail test, and we consider the both side critical region, the left hand as well as the right hand. Is that clear? When we take a one-tail test and when we take a two-tail test, one-tail test, when you mention the direction in your hypothesis, when you're not mentioning the direction, you will take a two-tail test. Is that okay? Okay. A hypothesis test evaluates the statistical significance of the result from a research study. Now, measuring the effect size. That is, the test determines whether or not it is likely that the obtained sample mean occurred without any contribution from a treatment effect. The hypothesis test is influenced not only by the size of the treatment effect, but also by the size of the sample. Thus, even a very small effect can be significant if it is observed in a very large sample. So basically, I wanted to mention here that the size always matters. Be it the sample size or be it the treatment size. So a very small treatment effect could have been observed very clearly if the sample size was big, or if the sample size is small but the effect is very big, or the size of the treatment is big, then also you might find some significant changes in it and you can observe it. So effect is also very important. And apart from Z scores, we also measure Cohen's d. This measures the size of the mean difference in terms of the standard deviation. And this helps you, it is by a effect size. Okay? This is a term which is a standardized measure of effect size. That is, what is the effect of the sample size, what is the effect of the treatment size, that is measured by Cohen's d. See, the black line, this is the distribution of SAT score before a treatment, with mu is equal to 500 and standard deviation is equal to 100. After the treatment, the scores after the treatment, like maybe you gave a coaching or something, the mean became 515 and your standard deviation remained as 100. So this D, that is the shift of mean from 500 to 515, is your D. That is, if you have to calculate your Cohen's D, you will actually be calculating the new mu minus the old mu divided by your standard deviation. So it is 515 minus 500 divided by 100, which will give you your Cohen's D. All right. And similarly, if you see here as well, you have the same thing. There was a sample and it shifted further. The mean changed from 100 to 115. So the change in the mean was 15 and the standard deviation is 15. So 15 by 15, the Cohen's D is 1. So generally, apart from your Z score, we also mention the effect of the size by measuring the Cohen's D. Now, power of a hypothesis test is defined as the probability that the test will reject the null hypothesis when the treatment does have an effect. The power of a test depends on the variety of factors, including the size of the treatment effect and the size of the sample. So as I was saying, it is very important to measure the size, that is the Cohen's D, because that helps you to determine the power of the hypothesis test. That is, the test will reject the null hypothesis even when the treatment does have an effect. All right. So with this, we come to the end. If you have any queries, please let me know. Anything related to whatever we have discussed. I had kept the last 10-15 minutes for any kind of doubts if we have. But in case if you have any doubts, please let me know. Satyajit sir, can we end the session a bit early? Yeah, Farhan Sridhar. Hello, sir. Good afternoon. How are you?
It was wonderful session because Satyajit sir is having lunch. I'm extremely sorry.
Okay.
It was wonderful.
It's so nice seeing you all after such a long time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So the participants, so please interact with the ma'am. If you have any questions or queries, so you can ask. We have a spare of time, 10 to 15 minutes more, right? You can interact with the ma'am.
Or I can also share my email ID in case you have any doubt in future regarding your research methodology or your hypothesis testing. I'm in the same city as yours, so we can get in touch and you can come up with queries. I'll just mention my email ID.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. 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 Farhan will continue.
Thank you so much for such a nice
Thank
valedictory.
you, ma'am.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. Thank you so much.
So do we have next session immediately? Farhan sir.
Good afternoon, sir. Satyajit this side.
Afternoon, Preet, and all present here. I see quite a number of names that I am familiar with. Some of my colleagues as well. All right.
Sir.
Astha
Good
Kumari. Astha Kumari,
Yes,
you
sir.
are a participant.
Sir, I'll be introducing you.
Okay, that's fine. But you are a participant to this program.
No, sir.
You are not a participant?
No, I'm just in charge of hosting the
Okay.
program.
You are a MBA student?
No, I'm an undergraduate student.
You are an undergraduate student. Okay. Anyway.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Astha, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of BIT Mr. Fraternity, I would like to extend a warm and hearty welcome to our workshop on research methodology, organized by Birla Institute of Technology, off-campus Lalpur, Ranchi. It is a great pleasure to have amidst us our special guest, Dr. Somnath Mukherjee. Sir will be discussing research talk on measuring perceived service quality, research challenges. A special welcome to our director, Dr. Vandana Bhattacharjee ma'am, who has been kind enough to support our endeavor. A very warm welcome to our esteemed faculty members, other guests, and attendees present here. Our guest speaker, Dr. Somnath Mukherjee, is an eminent scholar of Birla Institute of Technology, Lalpur, off campus, Ranchi, specifically in the area of brand management, service marketing, and cognitive processing. Sir, your presence with us is a refulgence and a source of inspiration for the students present here. Now, I request Sir to take forward with this session. Sir, please.
Thank you, Astha. Fine, where should I pick up? You tell me. You told me to take it forward, but you tell me where should I pick up?
Sir, introduce us to the topic.
Introduce us to the topic. Introduce you to the topic. Fine. Anything else? What's your understanding till now? Because I share my experience. When I have been participant to such workshops or maybe even FDPs, many times what we find that speakers, they come in with their thoughts. Many times these thoughts are not synchronized with the previous sessions. And ultimately what happens is the student gets confused. Hope that is not happening with you. Sumona, you are there. You are a known face. Let us break the ice. People have just logged in, it appears. Sumona, you cannot hear me? Dr. Avinash is there, Dr. Binu Sharma is there. Farhan Akhtar. Farhan, you can hear me? All right, so Farhan, you just tell me what is the way in which I should proceed. I just shared my experience. I have the feeling that when speakers come in and share their thoughts, many of the times they are not synchronized with other topics. The flow is not there. So I wish that does not happen. So I have something in my mind. Yes, definitely I will be sharing that with you. That's for sure. But prior to that, I was just wondering whether you are largely clear about this formulation part and how things can be taken forward, because ultimately your participation out here suggests that you want to take research forward. You are genuinely interested in learning. So what's your experience till this point of time? That is what I wanted to know, so that I could fine tune my presentation. Because it's not really what should happen is like I have a slide and then I should start with that and then go on talking with you. Rather, let me take the points from you, and then I would be trying to fine tune my presentation according to that. So if nothing is coming, let me just go ahead with what I have in my mind. Now, one thing you must be knowing till this at this point of time, and that's services. Like when we talk about research, definitely we do not say that it's only research in marketing or research in HR or research in finance. Research is a more generic term as such. So the first issue that what I would like is once you are getting into a research activity, mostly it's a doctoral research, mostly in a platform like this. You should be knowing the background, and you should be having this thing very clearly placed in your mind as to how you should be starting. So there has to be a starting point. And that starting point would come from a situation. That is what I feel has been discussed with you. Other resource persons, they must have discussed this thing with you. So there has to be a situation. You just cannot straight away start and prepare a questionnaire and go ahead with testing a hypothesis. It does not happen like that. So you start with a situation, and I will try to do exactly that thing. I will be sharing a small micro case with you, a caselet. You please go through it, read it sincerely, and then we will carry on with the discussion. And everything that I will be explaining, I will be trying to get back to this case study so that this example is really placed in your mind very firmly. So for that to happen, it's important that you read through it very carefully. Fine. So I will just share that case with you. You will be receiving that. I will be mailing that to the STTP. Satyajit, what did you say? STTP 2022 @bitmesra.ac.in. Am I right?
Yes, sir. You are right.
Right. Fine. Just give me a moment. I will be sharing that with you.
Yeah.
I just mailed it to STTP. Dr. Haider, if you could please confirm that to me.
Yes, sir, I got it.
Okay, fine. Please forward it to the participants.
Okay, sir.
Sumona, I was asking for you. You were not responding.
Yes.
There are some known faces, yes. Others? Do we have the participants only from Ranchi or from other places also? I know Sumona, I know Arunima, I know Farhan. Astha just introduced herself. Others from teaching fraternity, working professionals. Can we have informal discussion?
It's Nivedita
Sure, sir, we
here.
can have,
Hello,
sir.
Yes. Nivedita, you
Yes,
are?
sir.
You are
I am a
from
PhD scholar.
PhD scholar where? At BIT itself?
No, sir. Vinod Bhave University, Hazaribagh.
Okay, Binoba Bhave University. Who is the head there right now? Mantu Singh is still there.
Currently, Dr. R.K. Dwivedi is the head of in charge.
R.K. Dwivedi, okay.
Yes, sir.
And what's your research area, Nivedita?
I am a mathematics student, and my field is related to cyber attack and
That's very
cyber.
nice.
Yes, sir.
Yes, that's very nice. And we have some more inputs. Just to break the ice, I'm just trying to break the ice. It's not a teacher-student deliberation kind of thing. Let it not be a monologue.
I would like to say something, sir.
Yes, Sumona, yes, I was asking for you.
Yes, sir, definitely, sir. Pardon me because I'm outside now. I'm in Delhi
Okay, you
right
are-
now, so there might be some echoes, there might be some sound
No issues.
which I'm not able to cancel it. I'm
No
sorry for
issues.
that. To all the participants, everybody, presenters, very warm welcome and very good afternoon to everybody.
Sumona,
And
what
I'm
was your
Sumona.
PhD topic, research topic?
It is a study on employee attitude at workplace
All
and
right.
its relationship with organizational outcome.
Yes, very nice. Employee attitude.
It's basically a behavioral study.
Behavioral
And
study,
I'm
yes. It's
maximum
a
of the-
vast area. It's an ocean.
Yes, so it's a very
So
vast area.
what my feeling is, that's what I was telling when possibly you were not there, that I just cannot squeeze everything in this 1.5 hours. Like you will be logging in, then for 15 minutes you will be attentive, and then everything will move out unless we carry on with a proper discussion. Let it be a very elementary discussion, no issues. This is a very basic training program. In the second phase, we can go for the detailed discussions, like what your research is, the problems that really you get, how really you go on to formulate things, and I will share my experience. When I say serve qual, essentially, my research was in the context of trying to measure service quality, along with some other dimensions also. So what were the issues that I faced? I will share that. But prior to that, there has to be a build-up to that place. That's required. Straight away, if I get into it, nothing is going to work out.
So I would like to share a lot of information to the new researchers who have just started with the research or
Yes,
who have
yes.
just finished it. And yes, a PhD, it's a long time process. We have to be patient.
Very
And nobody
true.
have told us before that when we were enrolled.
And there
So it was-
there should be an open platform as well. I do not know whether STTP has planned that or not. I really am not very much aware of that. But there should be an
but-
open platform for discussion where everybody will be discussing.
But
Maybe some of the resource
Yes,
persons,
yes.
if they are free, they can pitch in and just have a very free
If
discussion.
I can get a chance anytime during this session, I would love to share my
Maybe an open session,
experience.
everybody can talk. What is?
Yes.
I'm trying to
Like-
make this an open session. I'm
Yes, so,
trying to make
when
this an open session.
I would like to share a little bit of my experience. I don't know it will be valuable to the new
Yes,
researcher
it will be.
or it
Others, in the meantime, you please go ahead with the case. Fine, please read it through. Then we will carry on with the discussion. Let's hear out what Sumana has to say.
When I have started my PhD, there was nothing that this kind of platform we have gone through with this. So I was totally blank. I don't know about the other, but I was totally blank. What I have to do, what are the steps we have to take? Everything was very blank. I was quite excited because I'm pursuing PhD. So I was very excited, but the ifs and buts of PhD was not known to me. Slowly, when I have interacted with my guide, my co-researchers, my seniors in the research field, things were more clear. It took me a long
Yes.
time to
It takes a
understand
lot
the
of time. It
process.
takes a lot of
Yes,
time.
and lot of patience to the
Very
researcher itself, the
lot of
scholar
readings,
itself,
lot of readings.
lot of
Ultimately,
readings,
it will
lot
get
of
distilled.
patience.
It will get distilled to something
I-
very
I-
specific.
I still remember the phase, the initial days. I was visiting each and every faculty. Please help me out. Please help me out. That time, my guide he is like God for me on that point of time. He told me everything about it. But even though I was going with everybody, you know this, you know that. How can I go forward with that? That time, that scopus itself was not clear to me. How I have to write, how I will write it like
All right,
like a
Sumana,
like a
just
professional.
one
You know?
point. Your PhD was in
Yes.
the area of attitude.
Yes.
What exactly you did, and what is your suggestion for future researchers? Very briefly, maybe in 2 minutes.
See, attitude is a vast field. It's a very, very vast field. The more you get in deep with it, you will get more and more knowledge towards it. So what I felt it, attitude remains with everybody. It will be in a positive way, it will be in a negative way, and how you tackle with that. You know, if
So
I will
basically,
say
basically,
you
what
change
your
your
topic
attitude.
was, that it was an attempt to find out how attitude influences workplace behavior. That's it,
Yes.
largely.
How
All
the
right.
attitude, yes, how the
Okay.
attitude actually enhances your work, or it will discourage any employee. It could attitude is
Okay. Did
related
you
to
did
a
you
lot
did
of
you
things.
go ahead with trying to find out the possible attitude change strategies that can be brought in by organizations? Did you come up
Yes,
with anything of this
we have
kind?
suggested also in my conclusion part of my research. I have
Okay.
even suggested also that this can be done if the organization permits, if the things got done. You know, we can do
All
some
right. So
changes and we can.
I take a leaf out of what Sumana says to all participants. Now, once you are carrying out a research, one of the most important thing is its applicability. Plain theory doesn't
Yes,
matter. That's why I said.
doesn't
And
matter.
yes, like an attitude measurement, like you should try to find a link between attitude and workplace behavior, productivity possibly. So she will find some drivers to this attitude, some factors
Yes,
which will be leading to this attitude change, positive change.
yes,
And that's a bit of information for an organization. If the organization really puts that to use, the organization is benefited. That is what
yes, that
researchers have to do. That
yes,
is what
and
all of
with
us will have to do.
yes,
Otherwise,
with that.
it is of absolute no utility.
No. Yeah, yes, sir, you are right. And with that, we have made a proper model with it, and that will be applicable for my research also, and for the future also. For the future researcher, if they want to go ahead with my research work, we have designed a model also in that. That is very good for
Yes.
the
All
organization
right.
also, and
Fine.
for my.
So, what's the first learning that comes out of this discussion? Participants, the first learning that comes out of discussion is that once you are focusing on a research, once you are carrying on with the research, you should be very careful about the output that you will be getting. This is something which should be helping you in taking proper decisions. It should be of value to an organization. It should make you more productive. It should make you more effective. So that's the kind of bend that you must be having in your mind.
Yes, and we need to be very patient throughout the
Yes. And
research
it will
program.
not come automatically. Like when I say
Yes.
that you are trying to identify a driver, you just cannot identify a driver out of nothing. There will be maybe reams of data that you will have to scan through, reams of articles that you will have to scan through, and only then something you can distill out, which emerges as a driver, which will have to be validated through some kind of model or things like that. So exactly that is what has to be done.
Yes.
And all of us really in our numerous research papers that we write, all of us really try to do something
Yes.
new, something that is of significance.
Yes.
Fine.
And
Thank you,
that makes our
Samona. Thank you, Samona, for really sharing your ideas.
thanks a
Fine.
lot, sir. Thanks a lot, sir.
Yeah. So meanwhile, participants, have you gone through the case? Did you go through it? Something.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Yes. What?
Sir, I am Kalyan.
You are
Kalyan Sardar.
Kalyan Sardar. Yes, Kalyan. Kalyan, you are from?
I am from West Bengal.
West Bengal, which place?
Yes, Sundarban, sir. Unique name.
Sundarban, that's a nice place. Right. People love to go there. You belong to a very nice place. So what's your research area? Yes, please, Kalyan. What's your research
area?
Currently,
I am a PhD scholar in Ranchi University.
All right, Kalyan. What's your area?
My subject is geography. And also my research area also is Sundarban.
Sundarban, okay. what in Sundarban? Mangroves? What exactly out there?
एक्चुअली मैं टॉपिक का नेम है पॉपुलेशन डायनामिक्स एंड इट्स इम्पैक्ट ऑन रिसोर्सेस.
Population dynamics and its impact on resources.
जी सर. Yes.
All right. So what exactly you are trying to do out there, Kalyan?
Actually, sir, I am from West Bengal and also lived in beside Sundarban area.
No, that's
sorry,
not my
sir.
question. That's not my question, Kalyan. What I was trying to understand from you, I'm not asking you. I'm trying to understand from you because it's your research area. Like the kind of final applicability of a study that I just talked about. What is the kind of applicability that you are looking at?
But sir, explain करने के लिए थोड़ा पीछे जाना पड़ेगा. Sorry sir, I am not fluently in English.
कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. Any language. Communication साफ होना चाहिए, समझ में आना चाहिए.
हाँ.
बोलिए.
एक्चुअली सर मेरा घर तो यहाँ पर है एंड बचपन से हम ये देख रहा हूँ एंड ऑल्सो आई एम ए जियोग्राफी स्टूडेंट एंड लॉट ऑफ स्टडी फ्रॉम जियोग्राफी एंड देन आई सी दैट दिस प्लेस very long time ago this place are not a inhabited place but present day population growth is very high and also the impact on Sundarban reserve forest and also impact on wildlife and this place and all over the Sundarban area people are very poor and also depend on the forest resource and my research applicability ये है कि population प्रेशर से वजह से जो फॉरेस्ट को लॉस हो रहा है एंड ऑल्सो वाइल्ड लाइफ को लॉस हो रहा है ऑल्सो ह्यूमन अटैक ऑन ह्यूमन फ्रॉम टाइगर क्रोकोडाइल सो दिस आर एंटर रिलेटेड मतलब जो ह्यूमन फॉरेस्ट को लॉस को कर रहा है एंड फॉरेस्ट ऑल्सो ह्यूमन.
So are you thereby trying to develop Mr. Kalyan, so thereby are you trying to develop a predictive model kind of thing, like with X percentage increase of population, this is going to be impact, anything of that kind you are trying to think of?
Sir, actually is a database on secondary data, but कैसे explain करें? सर फिर से बोलिए.
It's okay. लेकिन हम ये कह रहे थे कि क्या आप कोई प्रेडिक्टिव मॉडल डेवलप करने की तरफ बढ़ रहे हैं जहाँ पे आप फोरकास्ट मॉडल डेवलप कर सकेंगे जो कि
जी सर एक्चुअली हम जस्ट एक साल हुआ है रिसर्च टाइम
इवेंचुअली दैट विल टेक प्लेस. अभी तक कोई
मतलब मॉडल डेवलप नहीं की
लेकिन देखिए टू माय अंडरस्टैंडिंग you must have been explained about this thing previously also in your other sessions. Like you have to have some kind of, you cannot be absolutely clear about that, but some kind of clarity regarding the applicability of whatever your finding will be. That is something which is going to make you more focused in your initial days. And that is possibly the reason why we have our research questions, why we have our objectives and all of these kind of things, just to ensure that we are more focused. So anyway, the case, people have gone through the case. What exactly is the understanding?
Yes, sir. Sir, 1 minute.
Is this the enterprise rent-a-car measuring service quality, what I shared with you?
Yes, sir. This is.
Yes. So you see, one thing is for sure that, like, I am from the marketing area, so it's only natural that I will be reverting to this field for my definitions, for my maybe examples that I will be drawing. So you really can extrapolate or extend this thing to your own domains, respective domains, because I see people from divergent areas, people from mathematics, like Nivedita said, she's from mathematics, and Kalyan is from geography, others will be from different areas. Whatever, the central idea remains the same. And that's the limitation of maybe any presentation. Like I'm from marketing, I talk about services. Fine. So, but one thing is for sure what I said, like the applicability of that, fine, the social benefit to whatever model Kalyan will be developing, fine. Now, all of these kind of usefulnesses is something which is really going to be appreciated, and that's what should be our focus. Now, when we are getting into the case, now it's a different sector within marketing. We have marketing of consumer goods, we have marketing of industrial products, we have maybe marketing of services. They are slightly different to each other. Fine, maybe because whatever we are talking about, whatever is being offered in the form of a product, they really have got different characteristics. Fine, they are slightly different, and therefore the research approach that we have to adopt also becomes slightly different. So we should really be having an open mind to it. So it's a very specific presentation. Ideally, uh, I would have loved to have a more general approach towards this entire thing. Anyway, so once you read through the case, what are your findings? I will just share a set of questions with you. Fine. I will just share the presentation and the set of questions really. And feel free to share your views. You can interrupt me during the course of my discussion, I don't mind. Eventually, we will be learning from each other. Everybody has something to contribute. Is my screen shared?
No,
Is my
sir, your
screen-
screen, no, sir, it's not visible.
It's not visible. What could be the reason? It should be now. Now it should be visible. I've shared my entire screen.
Yes, now it is.
Hopefully, yes. So it's a very specific area. I will try and frame it based on two inputs that I got. Geography and mathematics, I do not know how I will be, or to what extent I will be able to really link it up with these areas. But really, I will try and do that. So let me straight away get to the questions. We will get back. Now, once you go to the case, just formulate these or try and answer these questions for me. You are wrong. You are not able to communicate in English. You can pick up Hindi. It doesn't matter. But please share your views. That's something where we will be able to evolve something out here. Fine. So, what could be the research objectives? Develop a research plan. Can you develop a research plan at this point? Can you develop a research plan? How could you plan measurement of service quality? That is what I will try and deliberate on. I will try and detail that for you. Fine. What could be the possible research issues that can be taken forward? Like Sumona said very correctly. She talked about attitude. She picked up maybe some drivers. So we need to pick up maybe a couple of more drivers. নেটওয়ার্ক চলে গেছে এটা এসছে বোধহয় ফেরত দাঁড়া 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 yes I just lost the network connection am I audible now
Yes,
Yes, sir.
so you are audible.
yes Astha all right fine so I just shared this case and I shared a couple of questions with you all right can you answer these questions for me really try and answer that let us do out an exercise what even if it is a minuscule proportion it hardly matters something once we finish the session there should be something that we should be moving out with like even one research question if I'm able to formulate even one strong relationship if I'm able to understand even that is something which is very nice let us try and work over that is the screen visible the research question screen
Yes, sir, it's visible, but
Yes.
I think you should maximize the presentation.
Praveen Zara, you are from? It's so nice when people start talking. Praveen Zara, you are from Ranchi? Which college? She lost the voice, it appears. Anyway, so what is that we get out here? In this situation, what happens? Now, this is still something that appears to be quite idealistic, isn't it? Once you go through this case, still we are not able to relate this thing with whatever is happening with us in this country. The way maybe companies really dole out services to us. We still really find ourselves at odds. Now, look at this Kevin Kickman, this person. Now, something wrong happened with his car, fine. And then he went to a nearby garage and then he was given another car to really drive through, fine. And then the kind of payment that he was required to make. And then finally, the company really trying to find out whatever is really wrong, whether everything was right in the way really the car was provided. Fine, as a replacement, as a stopgap arrangement kind of thing. So that's broadly the situation. Now the question is, once you look at this marketing spectrum, you find the market leaders, like there is one concept in marketing what we call is segmentation. Fine. जैसे जो नॉन मैनेजमेंट बैकग्राउंड जो नॉन मार्केटिंग बैकग्राउंड से हैं या नॉन मैनेजमेंट बैकग्राउंड से उनको ब्रीफली ये चीज बता दें कि आप एक ऑफरिंग के साथ सब लोगों के पास नहीं पहुंच सकते आपको उसको फाइन ट्यून करना पड़ेगा उनके हिसाब से कस्टमाइज करना पड़ेगा या फिर एक छोटा ग्रुप को आप आइडेंटिफाई करते हैं और उस ग्रुप को आप कुछ ऑफर करते हैं दैट बिकम्स योर ऑफरिंग टू दैट पर्टिकुलर ग्रुप एंड दैट होमोजेनियस ग्रुप बिकम्स योर सेगमेंट So it's a continuous offering. Like we talk about this entry-level car coming from Maruti, they have the Alto targeted at a different group of people. Then they have the Ciaz targeted at a different group of people, and then they have this Breeza targeted at a different group of people. But all members within this segment, they will be more or less similar in the context of maybe the applicability of the marketing mix elements. क्योंकि कहीं ना कहीं कुछ फायदा मार्केटर को पहुंचेगा तभी तो वो देगा. तो इसको सेगमेंट कहते हैं हम लोग. तो जो कार कंपनीज हैं ये कार कंपनीज क्या कर रहे हैं ये अलग अलग सेगमेंट को पकड़ के रखा था इन्होंने लेकिन ये कंपनी कितनी इंटेलिजेंटली इन्होंने एक नया सेगमेंट को कार्व आउट किया ये इंश्योरेंस वाला कि भाई जो भी ऐसे सिचुएशंस बनेंगे ऐसे सिचुएशंस बनने के बाद जब लोगों की कार की रिक्वायरमेंट होगी देन आई एम देयर टू रीच आउट टू दिस ग्रुप ऑफ पीपल सो even this is something an outcome of a marketing research activity. आप शायद अगला स्टेज में रिसर्च का पढ़ेंगे. You talk about maybe factor analysis, you talk about cluster analysis and things like that, where you identify groups of people. And then you identify a segment. Statistically, you evolve a segment. So that's also a kind of research. Research does not just mean that I am into maybe measuring satisfaction of people. Mostly it happens in the colleges, customer satisfaction study of XYZ. It does not happen like that. It's really multifaceted. There are immense areas where really there is a scope. I just got 2 inputs, or rather 3 inputs. Regarding Sumona's study, I just tried to say something. Regarding the Astha, possibly somebody doing a research in mathematics. Once we get into the details, but in this 1.5 hours, we really cannot get into everything. So at this point of time, what they are trying to do, they are trying to find out new avenues, new ways in which they can act so that their offering becomes more effective, and in turn, the entire offering is more satisfying. That's the entire idea of this entire exercise that this rent-a-car company is doing. So that's the entire idea. So if I'm able to identify, say for instance, I'm able to identify certain drivers, like if I go on to refer to what Sumona said in her research. Now, if I get these drivers with these, and if I'm acting on these drivers, then as a company, I really will be more effective than anybody else. Any ABC, I will be more effective than them. So identifying these drivers, finding out the drivers to satisfaction, finding out maybe a hierarchical relationship. Like nowadays, any research journal that you get into, you will find that there is structural equation modeling that people really use. So it's maybe a model that people develop. There is a set of relationships that is suggested in the form of maybe a moderating relationship or a mediating relationship. And then that is something which is put to test. So even that kind of a thing can happen. So that's the entire way in which we go on to formulate something. But the point. So again, referring to this case that I shared with you, basically, if I'm talking about service quality, the firm is trying to identify ways and means through which the quality of service can be improved. That's the entire idea. And why is that being done? So that the end result is economically beneficial to the firm. Like, let us be very, very clear about one thing. Like I tell this to my management students, that in end of the day, if you are not contributing to profitability, if you are not contributing to productivity, you have a very less chance of getting acceptability. Even when Sumona was talking about her study, she was talking about workplace productivity. So that should play in our mind. That's what I feel. That's something which should play in our mind. So the question is that the quality of service, how do we really judge that? How do we really judge the quality of a service? Because service is something that's very different to maybe the mobile phone that you are holding or the laptop through which you may have logged in. It's something very different. I just cannot quantify it in very specific terms in the way I would really do with maybe a mobile phone or maybe an automobile or something of that kind, where the output can be assessed. So I will have to take a different approach. I will have to adopt a different approach. Neither can I go and straight away ask you a question, develop a questionnaire and give it to you and say that please rate me in a scale of 1 to 7, whether you are satisfied or what your feeling is about the quality of service that I have provided. Because please understand this fine print, because this is a composite. This is not a single item that we are talking about. This is a composite, and a composite of, obviously when I'm talking about composite, there are different components to that. Fine. So that's the introduction. Till this point of time, I was just, what I was trying to tell you was that I just picked up a very small area, a rent-a-car company. They identified a segment. They are trying to make an assessment of service quality. But what they cannot do is, they cannot straight away ask people in the form of a single question to rate themselves on a scale as to what is the quality of service, because service is a composite of a number of elements. Am I clear with that? Can I get a response? यहाँ पे अगर कोई query है तो पूछिए. Feel free. कोई suggestion है तो दीजिए. Professor Haider.
Yes, sir, please.
All right. So, am I clear till this point of time? We are trying to add. I said it's a huge area. Research, it's a huge area. It's an ocean. I just picked up one thing. I introduced you to the case, and I picked up one thing. The company trying to make an assessment of quality of the service that it is providing. How will it do it? How will the company do that? I repeat, at the risk of being repetitive, I'm telling you that we will have to understand this thing, that if this is a composite, what are the elements? Right? Now, just a moment. If I'm clear till this point of time, I can go ahead. Now, this is just give me a moment. Is the full screen shared?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, let us now move beyond this point. This is just to justify the globalization, liberalization, services becoming important. I gave you this example. I said I will be drawing reference to the case that I referred to. If visualize a situation about Ola and Uber and JetCab and others who are there, or maybe other companies like Zoom Car and others who are renting out cars to consumers. Now, just imagine these companies stepping into this country. We as managers, we as marketers, we as researchers, we will have to visualize these things. See, these companies come in. Avis comes in, Rent-A-Car comes in, and they adopt these practices. And these are practices that are tested. Now the question is, where do we stand then? Is it that we should not prepare right from today? Yes. And I do not say that people are not preparing. People are preparing definitely. But that's what globalization and liberalization and this economy is getting connected with each other. That is why all of these kind of things are happening. Fine. You have to. If you are not doing it, somebody else will do it and he will walk away with success. You are left out. So you will have to do that. So that's the prelude. That's what I'm trying to tell you. That's what I said, that whatever you are working with, that should result in something very innovative. these are the key. I will very quickly go through these things and then get back to that core thing that I was talking about that composite. Fine. So these are just some of the reasons. Like just trying to place it in your mind. Like if you are specific to service research, just trying to place it in your mind that this is so very important. And these are some of the important changes that are driving maybe adoption of research in the area of services. I will quickly share through these, just trying to make things more structured for you. These are all requirement, integrated customer-driven processes. We as consumers, we are participants, like in services. One of the core things that comes in is simultaneous production and consumption. That's a key service characteristic. So what is happening right now in this class, in this session, the service is being produced, I am producing the service and you are consuming the service. And if we do not have a free discussion, it's not getting customized. Because if I come with a standard thing, I have prepared certain points, the slide is there, possibly I will not be able to connect with you. So what is happening is, at the back of my mind, what is playing is how really I can link it up with what maybe Kalyan is doing in Sundarbans, or maybe what that girl, I just forgot her name, from Vinova University, whatever she is doing in mathematics. Fine. So that's really the quick response, and that's the integration. That's the integrated customer-driven processes, the customer contributing to whatever is evolving out. Fine. Similar other things. Now this is what I shared already. Now I get back to this service quality thing. I raised a very pertinent issue, and that issue is I just cannot straight away go to you and ask you that this is what a service is. I just cannot do that. So what can I do? I will have to understand what service is, what service quality is. Service quality is a composite. One of the most accepted definition of service quality is what was forwarded by a trio. We call that trio PZB, Parashuraman, Zithal and Bittner. They forwarded this definition and they said that it's whatever I'm expecting and whatever is being delivered. Like you are making an assessment of the service that is being delivered right now to you. You had an expectation. Join the STTP, and once it is being delivered to you, a kind of perception that you develop. There is an expectation that you had about me. If your expectation is was very high, then there is a dissatisfaction that comes in. So it's important, but is it the only dimension? That is what we will. So by and large, we start with the proposition that it's a measure of how an organization delivers itself compared to expectations of its customers. इसका मतलब to identify expectations, हमें expectation को भी measure करना पड़ेगा, perception को भी measure करना पड़ेगा, और तब जा करके satisfaction या तब जा करके हम service quality की एक assessment कर पाएंगे. What the point? इस पे और हम detail करेंगे आपको. Researchers and managers thrive for learning details about components of service quality. I already said that to you because it's a composite. जैसे composite के एक और example आपको देते हैं, छोटा सा example. जैसे if you make an assessment of this STTP, will it be on the basis of just the fees? No. It will be on the basis of fees. It will be on the basis of maybe the content that was shared with you. It may be on the basis of what you perceived in terms of what you learned. So it's a composite of these three I stated, plus a lot number of things. So once we are talking, or maybe you are making an assessment of the academic environment of your institution. Just because the classes are on time does not mean that the academic institution is really very, no. It's again a composite. It's composite of what the teachers are, what the course content is, the examination pattern, maybe the job, whether you can hang out with your friends. It's a composite of all of these things. So I, as a researcher, I as a marketer, I will have to identify what these components are. The person who is able to identify and address these components is the person who emerges the winner. Got the point? So we will not get into all that, just trying to identify what the components are. Now, एक चीज जो है क्वालिटी के कंटेक्स्ट में वो ये है कि क्वालिटी को दो तरीके से हम देखते हैं. वी टॉक अबाउट द प्रोसेस क्वालिटी एंड द आउटकम क्वालिटी. मींस व्हाट इज द आउटकम एंड व्हाट इज द वे इन व्हिच इट वाज डिलीवर्ड. Like you went to a lawyer, and the lawyer was very polite. He was very attentive. Fine, he was very patiently listening to you. He was addressing your queries. Fine, that's the process quality. And the outcome quality is whether you ended up winning the lawsuit. Many times in services, you just cannot make an assessment of the outcome. You cannot. You cannot make an assessment of the outcome of this STTP. In very clear terms, I don't say you will not be, but in very clear terms, you will not be able to. So, the process becomes very important. The way in which this thing is being delivered. So, whenever we talk about quality, we talk about quality really being composite of the process and the technical part. I must focus on both. And once you look at services, if people are having a marketing background or management background, we talk about three kinds of marketing initiatives. We talk that internal marketing, interactive marketing, and external marketing. ये तीन मिलाकर के ट्रायंगल बनती है. तीनों एक में से कोई साइड अगर नहीं रहेगा तो ट्रायंगल नहीं रहेगा. So the people, the promotion, and the way in which this is being delivered, everything becomes important. So ये एक isolated चीज नहीं है कि this is something which really works instantly. There are so many factors that will get in. Now, what are the challenges to measuring service quality? ये कुछ challenges I have listed out for you. और फिर इसकी solution हम देने की कोशिश करेंगे. Because what when Dr. Chaudhary really asked me, I said that fine, I will be trying to talk about this quality measurement and maybe certain problems that really I faced in carrying out my research. We'll come to that. So quality definitions could be consumer driven. You have your own set of quality definition. Your definition could be that I'm stretching things too far, and that could in turn really be negatively influencing your perception. Is it internally driven, intrinsic, or expert-driven sources? So the standards that are framed, that's a function of lot number of things. Customer-driven quality standards driven by ideal expectations, performances, detailed criteria, expert-driven, internal-driven. Fine. So ये makes things very complex. It's really a complex thing, too complex to be really offered to you in the form of a single question trying to get your opinion as to whether the quality of service that was provided was good enough or not. It's really too simple. It really cannot happen like that. So we need to structure that. How do we structure it? As I said, PZB, Sorry, I was wrong. I said Bittner. It's Berry. I'm very sorry for that. It's slipped out of my mind. So Parashuraman, Zithal, and Berry were amongst the earliest researchers to emphatically point out that the concept of quality prevalent in the goods sector is not extendable to the service sector. They were the first to say that. Like सर्विसेज में कंसेप्ट आती है, इसको हम लोग फिजिकल एविडेंस करते हैं. जैसे आप एक टूटा फूटा कॉलेज में जाते हैं, like once I happened to take one of my known ones to NIT Jamshedpur, and I was there at the time when he was taking admission, and it was really in a very dismal state at that point of time. So I did not interact with any person, but the first impression was that अरे यार यहाँ पे क्या पढ़ाई होगी. That's a negative perception that I momentarily developed. So that is something which has been validated subsequently through numerous researchers, that physical evidence has a very strong role to play. And that is something which was forwarded by Philip Kotler way back in the 70s. And he coined the term atmospherics. So you frame something, you forward something, and that is what is taken forward in the form of research. People go on to contribute in their own way. They go on to contribute. Fine. So they were the first to really forward this thing, and the good part or the bad part, whatever is that, it is still that finds extensive use. It finds an extensive use. So they said that good sector or services they are different. Find the tangible cues do not exist. I will not get into trying to explain what a cue is, because that will make the discussion really give it a different dimension altogether. So coming back to the structure part, what they forwarded was this disconfirmation paradigm. And that was in the form of what I said, the difference between expectation and performance. That's the disconfirmation concept that really came in, that was forward. The perception and expectations, there is a performance gap, they called it that way, and it causes a dissatisfaction. A positive discrepancy leads to consumer delight and vice versa. Means that is what I said. If what you expected was very high and what you are getting right now is very bad, then it's a very negative thing. It will cause dissatisfaction. And so what comes in out here is two learnings for us. First, that it's a composite. Second, PZB, they forwarded the concept based on disconfirmation, and they said that they forwarded the model. They really borrowed it from, or rather, this is something which again was forwarded. Simultaneously, many people were working with this. It's expected and perceived service. Technical quality, functional quality contributes to the image formation. Image formation leads to perceived service quality. And there are two other elements that goes on to influence it. So now see on the left hand side, there are traditional marketing activities जो आपकी expectation को shape कर रही है. आपकी expectation shape यहाँ पे कैसे? How was your expectation shaped for this STTP? Maybe the brochure, maybe your friends who may have stated, maybe the resource persons, the list that you may have seen that there are people from IITs, IIMs and things. So that shaped your expectation. So when a service firm is forwarding something, once they're forwarding something, that is when I'm making a promise to you, that's when I'm raising your expectation. So that's also one of the major factors in services, what people say, do not overpromise. So that's a research area, expectation. Find out the drivers. These are the traditional ones. We do not know what are the other areas, what are the other drivers. We will have to find out continuously. That's the scope for us. That's the research that we can get into. Similarly, perception. What is that shapes your perception? your attitude, your personality, the personal domain, the situational factors, numerous things will come in. देखिए research issue क्या आती है? You identify the drivers, to perception, the drivers to brand image. Just if I take that model, what I shared with you by Grondros, that really opens up an area that I can take forward. I can take that forward in the form of specific research. Like when one of the research scholars was stating some time back that she went into attitude and then workplace productivity. It's not that it was not there. It was there. But she contributed more to that. She identified more number of drivers. She identified new relationships. She validated more relationships. That's how this entire thing went ahead. So when I talk about this expectation and perception, there are 4 kinds of gaps that were identified. और उन लोगों का कहना था कि गैप एक्सपेक्टेशन और परसेप्शन के बीच का भी जो गैप है वो गैप चार ब्रॉड रीजंस के लिए आ सकते हैं और ये ब्रॉड रीजंस आपके सामने हैं. हम बहुत ज़्यादा इस पे डिटेल्स पे नहीं जाएंगे बिकॉज वी आर ऑलरेडी नियरिंग द एंड ऑफ द सेशन. सो ये गैप मॉडल है. देखिए हम आपको इसके पहले आई विल टॉक अबाउट देखिए गैप ये गैप पे हम लोग जाते हैं. Now that's what I was suggesting in the beginning, that it's not a standard communication that I'm essentially fine tuning it as per the progression that is taking place. So this is the first gap. See here the factors. These are all areas that you can identify for your research. These are all areas. Similarly, we go for gap 2. All areas, these open up immense areas, unsystematic new service development process, poor service design. That designing was wrong. And why was the designing wrong? Because the research inputs were not right. Vague unidentified service designs, failure to connect service design to service positioning, a failure of external markets. So these are all areas. These are all areas that suggest the research, possible research areas that you can pick up. Deficiencies, HR में deficiencies है. Ineffective recruitment, failure to match supply, customers not fulfilling roles, problem with service intermediaries. ये सब आपके areas हैं. So ये what these areas are suggesting. These areas are suggesting that we have so many areas which we can take forward. Over-promising in advertising, over-promising in personal selling, over-promising through physical evidence cues. Can I frame a hypothesis that over-promising, or maybe if I frame a stepwise regression kind of thing, like advertising influencing your perception, and then perception influencing your, or advertising influences your expectation, and expectation influences your service quality perception. So these are all possible areas that really influence you, that really tells us how and what we can do. Now, getting back to the composite elements में जाना बहुत जरूरी है. देखिए तो जो मेजरमेंट इंस्ट्रूमेंट आया था, वो मेजरमेंट इंस्ट्रूमेंट था सर्वकॉल, जो आज भी इस्तेमाल होती है. इट्स अ स्टैंडर्ड स्केल. प्रीवियसली इट हैड मोर नंबर ऑफ आइटम्स. Eventually it got reduced to 22 items. It's a multi-dimensional research scale. Fine. और they identified 5 dimensions, जो हम आपको बता रहे थे कि एक सिंगल क्वेश्चन के साथ आप आगे नहीं बढ़ सकते. You just cannot go there. You have a composite, and this composite is of these 5 elements: reliability, assurance, tangibility, empathy, and responsiveness. These are the 5 elements that come in. देखिए reliability पे ये एक standard scale है. Yesterday I just logged into when Dr. Pranab Kumar was deliberating with you, and he was talking about this standard scales that are being used. So this is a standard scale. He talked about this validation. Obviously, these scales will have to be validated. But this is a standard set that is there, that has found universal acceptance. It was tested across industries. My study using this thing was in the retail banking sector. I will share that article DOI with you. It's an SCI publication. You can find that. So, reliability, assurance, tangible, empathy, responsibility. These are the 5 dimensions that have been identified. Reliability means what? The ability to perform, promise service dependably and accurately. Assurance. You come to the college and you go to the counter person, says कि sir कब बंद होगा form fill up का date, last date क्या है, और वो कहते हैं कि हमें मालूम ही नहीं है. That's a failure. And that failure is an outcome of what? And is an outcome of a poor internal marketing exercise. उतना details पे नहीं जा रहे हम लोग. Tangibles जो आपको बता रहे थे, physical evidence की जो बात कर रहे थे. Empathy, कितना caring है. Will you work that, like in the case that we were referring to? Was there an element of empathy? Yes. Were they trying to care for you? Was there an individualized attention? Yes. Responsiveness, was there a prompt response? Yes. Reliability, can I rely on them? They did not miss out on sending this letter to you. Fine. The courtesy of the employees. So these are the dimensions that have been identified. And these dimensions are the composites of service quality as was forwarded by PZP, Parashuraman, Seethal and Berry. Fine. तो अब क्या करना है? अब हम अगर किसी को सवाल पूछते हैं तो इन 5 डायमेंशंस से पूछेंगे और 2 बार पूछेंगे. एक बार एक्सपेक्टेशन लेंगे, एक बार परसेप्शन लेंगे, और फिर we go for finding the difference, and thereby we will be able to arrive at the final conclusion. ये आपके questions हैं. इसको ये just rephrase होगा. Does the maybe XYZ did the company provide the service as it was promised? Or did you expect that it will be providing the service? That's the expectation part. So ये set of questions है 22, and this is the reason why it was criticized. Servpol की criticism इसीलिए हुई थी. हालांकि people are using this extensively, it is being used. हम connected भी हैं कि नहीं? आवाज जा रही है ना?
Yes, sir.
ठीक है. तो सर्वपोल इंस्ट्रूमेंट की जब हम बात करते हैं सर्वपोल इंस्ट्रूमेंट में the problem that we had was that we were having required to take 2 measurements, and this is the problem that I faced. Challenges, coming back to the challenges that I faced, and once I share the DOI, you can go to that and just scan through the article. It's no point explaining the article to you. I will just tell you what I faced, because when you go to the field, when you ask your respondents, mine was retail banking sector. And once I moved to the people and tried to ask them about this part of the pilot study itself, when I was asking them about expectation and the perception, it was really giving erroneous results. It's bound to happen that way. There is also another thing that will come in. What you have studied in experimental research, uncontrolled variables will come in. And maybe if you are really working to arrive at a very precise kind of output, you will have to factor in this and then try and remove that from, and that becomes so very complicated. And that's exactly why this was criticized. And the critics, what did they say? They said that it's only the performance only model that should be forwarded. That was forwarded by Cronin and Taylor. Cronin and Taylor said that yes, it's okay, like 5 elements fine, questions fine, but do not take 2 measurements. And they had a host number of things to say in favor of this. And I myself did not adopt the SERV-POL scale. I migrated to the SERV-PERF scale. That's the performance only model. Only take 1 measurement. So that's a major problem that a researcher feels once. Like idealistic in a classroom, everything is fine. But once you go to the field, nobody is there to respond to your query. And you have to get a query twice across 22 items. Along with, like, it's not just service quality alone. There are numerous other things. So once you get into that, it becomes so very difficult. So that's a practical issue that you face. But believe me, my migration from SERV-POL to SERV-PERF was not this easy. It was a very tough decision. I had to scan through a lot of literature. I just cannot say that fine, SERV-POL is not good. If I am forwarding SERV-PERF, I will have to have my own set of justifications. So Cronin and Taylor, they forwarded, they have their own support base. EZB, they have their own support base. I stated my problem. Once you are adopting it, it's up to you what you adopt and how you adopt it. Fine. What does the SERV-PERF say? The maintain performance expectation determines service quality. Fine. This is what we discussed. What could be the corresponding research issues to this? The directionality of service quality satisfaction relationship. What PZB said that it's service quality and satisfaction. There were many people who disagreed to this. They said that no, it's not that causal relationship. It's slightly different. So all of these are practical issues that really may come in. Fine. So I'm running short of time. I will quickly share my paper and just try and tell you. Just a moment. Just a moment. The PDF is shared. The PDF is shared. Dr. Haider, Dr. Chaudhary. Have I lost my voice?
Yes, sir, please.
Is it sharing?
Okay. I just shared the PDF file.
Okay, sir.
Yes, I just shared the file now. Just this is what got published in Vision. Fine. Now, this is the general thing. I'm not going to explain this thing to you. I just tell you this relationship. See this relationship. Just service quality, 22 items. It's not just like that.
So we had, excuse me, sir, we had shared the PDF.
I have shared the PDF.
Yes, we have shared the PDF with us, and we had shared it with the contestant participants.
This one, the one that is on screen right now.
No, this one.
This is a snapshot of my article.
Okay, not this one.
Yes, this is a snapshot of my article. I just want to summarize whatever I said. I just to summarize through this thing, the complexity that I was talking about, the challenge that I was talking about. Now look at this thing. Look at this thing. Look at the complexity. These are all having a relationship. See, this is a structural equation modeling equation that really a model that was developed and that was tested. Ultimately, to brand equity. These are all kind of relationships were established. So word of mouth, employees, advertising, then physical evidence. All of these influences perceived quality. All of these, how they influenced your service brand image. All of these, how these influence corporate brand image. All of these, how this influences your user brand image, and ultimately how that culminates into influencing brand equity. So that's a very complex thing. So it's not just the set of 12, rather 22 questions that really come in. So we will like even each, if these are having maybe on an average 3 items, just imagine the sheer length of the questionnaire. So that's really a practical challenge that you will face. So the details you will get. I just concentrated on one simple item, and that was this perceived quality. And this perceived quality is what I was just, I'm placing my cursor on that. Only this domain that I focused on. Fine. I told you that SERVQual is there. I migrated from SERVQual to SERVPerf with my own set of justification. The backdrop to that, why you identify. Ultimately, the toughest part, if you ask me, I would say is the framing of a model. That's the toughest part of any research activity. And this model framing comes up with a lot of literature survey, which will ultimately culminate in this model framing. And if you're able to validate that, that's really something which is really good enough. Fine. So it's a very exhaustive area. I said in the very beginning also that the resource person will come and then he will go on and on and on. I just try to evolve something with the help of a case and then try to corroborate that with maybe a kind of study and just shared my experience in the context of adoption of a different scale, moving ahead with something and then adopting something else. And I tell you one thing, once I moved ahead with SERVQual, I really did not feel like I should be dumping that. So the answer to that I found in SERVPerf, where everything was the same except that one measurement. So that's something which really was very interesting, because eventually once you start with the study, you do not know much about it. But the point. So again, just to sum up, I do not say that these are the only 2 things that are there. There are other scales that have been forwarded as well. अगर मान लीजिए आपको कोई ये कहे कि आप ये सब तो बहुत पुरानी चीजें हैं, अगर ऑनलाइन में मान लीजिए आपको रिसर्च करनी है ऑनलाइन सर्विस क्वालिटी के कंटेक्स्ट में, अगर आप कर रहे हैं, so what is that we have? Do you have anything out there? Yes, there are numerous studies like maybe e-commerce websites. How do you make an assessment of that? Online education, how do you make an assessment of that? Do we have standard scales which have been fine-tuned to this? Yes, they have been. So we have numerous other models also. And I will just share the screen with you just to sum up. These are some of the other studies that really have been carried out and which really may prove very handy for you. Like retail service method, we have the models. We have the models for the antecedent mediator model, the internal service quality model, the IT-based model, fine, for IT companies, internet banking model, e-service quality model, fine, like everybody is talking about maybe e-things. So you have these works that have already been done, and you can adopt these things and take your work forward. But the point. So we will end at this note. I still did not hear from others. I just got introduced to Nivedita Kumari. Nivedita Kumari is from Vinod Bhave University. Why do I say Vinod Bhave University? Because I passed out of that university. I did my graduation from there. Arunima is known. Astha Atul Kumar. Avinash is my colleague. Divya Ratan Pungari, Farhan Akhtar, I know. G. Malik, Kalyan Sardar. Kalyan Sardar, all the best for your study in Sundarban.
Thank you, sir.
Sandeep Hazra, possibly I know you. Sandeep sir, if you are there.
Yes, I am here.
Yes. Have I interacted with you when you were in Bhubaneswar?
Yeah.
Yes. इसीलिए नाम हमको लग रहा था कि it's a known name. You are in Devgar, I believe, Sandeep.
Yes. Exactly.
Nice talking to you. Come down to Lalpur if you happen to come to Ranchi.
Sure.
We'll love to meet.
Right.
So nice.
He will be.
We will meet. We should.
Sure.
We
So
should.
I will.
And if I happen to go to Devgar, I will definitely be calling you up.
Sure.
Hopefully, you will be able to help me out
Yeah.
with Baba Temple.
Sure.
Nice. All right, so we end. It was a nice discussion. From my side, I do not know. Of others, your
Yes,
perception, I do not know. So can we end then?
Yes, sir. I would like to express our deep thanks on the behalf of Birla Institute of Technology off campus Lalpur to our guest Dr. Somnath Mukherjee sir for such an amazing and informative presentation and giving us an insight on this relevant topic. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Vandana Bhattacharjee ma'am, director of our center, for providing such a platform. My sincere thanks to Director Satyajit Chaudhary sir and Dr. Saeed Anish Haider sir, who took effort to organize this event. Special acknowledgement to all my faculty members for joining the session and making this a great success. I also thank the committee members who contributed to this event. I would also like to express my gratefulness to all the attendees for taking out time and supporting us in this endeavor. We look forward to conduct more such events after. Hope Dr. Somnath Mukherjee sir will join us in the future too. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Astha. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, sir.
The best part would be if students get in touch with us. Take my email ID. It's available with Satyajit sir and Haider sir. If you are interested, you can get in touch with me. We are available. We would love to help you out to the best possible extent. Fine. And it feels nice to be connected. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.